Join Gilda's Run Walk on Sunday, October 5th in Middleton. Run a self-timed 5K or walk 2 miles to support Wisconsin families facing cancer. Your team and fundraising help Gilda's Club ensure that no one faces cancer alone. After the finish, enjoy Ruth's Chris Burgers, chocolate shop ice cream, and fun for all ages. Register by August 31st for early bird pricing, just $35 for adults, $25 for kids, plus get the official event t-shirt. Sign up now at gildasrunwalk.com. Let's make every step count. You're invited to Bike the Barns, a one-of-a-kind food and farming adventure taking place on Sunday, September 21st in the Madison area. Hosted by Fair Share CSA Coalition, this fundraising bike ride supports local farmers and fresh food access. With fresh farm foods and drinks, live tunes, and farm tours at each stop, plus all skill levels are welcome because it's a ride, not a race. Spots fill up quickly, so register today at csacoalition.org and pedal together for fresh food for everyone. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Last week, Governor Tony Evers declared a state of emergency in response to severe flooding in southeastern Wisconsin, what's being dubbed as a 1,000-year event flood. Madison also experienced extreme downpours from that same storm system. So joining me to talk about the latest flooding event is state climatologist Steve Vavris. We're so happy to have you back. Steve, welcome back to CityCast Madison.
Thanks for inviting me, Bianca.
Yeah. As soon as this happened, I was like, we need to talk to Steve. So thank you for making the time. So, here in Madison, we got about 2 inches of rain from the storm system. It still is a lot. We did have streets that closed, but our friends over in Milwaukee, the rain that happened there, they braved a lot last weekend, and they're still in the process of cleanup and recovery. So if we could dig into what happened there, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reports some parts of Milwaukee saw more than 10 inches of rain. I saw up to 12 inches in less than a 24-hour period. Steve, what did things look like in the Milwaukee area?
Things are really bad in the Milwaukee area, as you can imagine, when we get this much rainfall in such a short amount of time. In fact, it was unofficially the statewide record for most rainfall in a 24-hour period. That record is currently 11.7 inches, and there's going to be reviews done by the National Weather Service, the State Climatology Office, and others to see whether the measurement was reliable enough to count as a new statewide record. But there was more than one rain gauge that exceeded that current record. So it's entirely possible that there will be a big news flash at some point down the road saying that this event really was the new statewide record.
Yeah. I mean, the images and the experiences seem very drastic. Just looking at images from Wauwatosa, seeing railroad tracks completely covered and water overflowing bridges, houses are flooded, streets are broken, businesses, are closed. What is your reaction to this, Steve? This is your job, this is your career, you follow these trends. What's your reaction when you saw this dramatic rainfall?
Well, like anyone, my heart goes out to people who are suffering, especially those who are in really dangerous situations, being on the road, their cars filled up. There were reports that people had to use their sunroofs to get out of their cars because there was so much water. I mean, really life-threatening conditions. Fortunately, as far as I've heard, no one died from the event, which is wonderful news. But whether one prepares for something like this and knows it's coming or not, when you have an event of this magnitude, there's going to be big problems. For instance, there was a report in the paper saying a man who's lived in Milwaukee for 50 years and never had a wet basement has 3 feet of water in his basement now. So, when you cross this kind of threshold, there's going to be big problems.
Yeah, it's almost a miracle that there weren't any reports as of us talking right now that folks passed away. That is very good luck, but you can imagine what could have happened. It could have been much more dramatic. Folks might remember that Madison experienced a really impactful flash flood event in 2018. How does that compare to what Milwaukee residents just recently experienced?
The Madison area event in August of 2018, very similar almost to the day in 2018, affected the west side of Madison, it affected Middleton, it affected western Dane County generally, and the amounts were pretty comparable. There were some unofficial reports of a foot or more, similar to what we're seeing in the Milwaukee area. but it didn't make a clean hit right on a major urban area. I mean, yes, Middleton, but Middleton is not the size of Milwaukee. And so it didn't affect as many people. And the other good news about that event is that it lasted longer. It was more prolonged over a single day. It didn't happen just within a few hour period. It was more like maybe a 12-hour period. And so it was a little easier for the stormwater drainage to handle a rainfall of that amount.
Yeah, I know I was woken up in the middle of the night a couple of times. Like this storm was really intense. Also here in Madison this past weekend, the city had to shut down streets near the intersection of East Johnson and 4th Streets, Lexington Avenue, and Stoughton Road. Do you have any notes about the flooding here in Madison or in the Madison area?
Mostly the reports that you just cited. There was some street flooding. There were some minor issues, nothing on the scale of Waukesha and Milwaukee counties. But it did give us a taste of what happened that evening and into Sunday morning. So it was a pretty broad system. It was a stationary weather front with a lot of moisture in the air covering all of southern Wisconsin. And so the conditions were right for really heavy rainfall. But Madison just got a glancing blow, whereas the far southeast got a direct hit. And that's because the trigger that really released all that moisture was focused more in those counties. Waukesha, Milwaukee County, Washington, and Ozaukee, I think, were the main four.
And the Storm Milwaukee experience is a, quote, 1,000-year event. That's what we're hearing, which I just learned doesn't mean it only happens every 1,000 years, obviously, but it means that in any given year, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance it will happen. Steve, are these rare events becoming less rare?
They are becoming less rare. And the reason is that the warming climate means that warmer air can hold more water vapor. And so when conditions are right, like they were over the weekend, it means that more rainfall can be wrung out. And so this is something that we've seen not only in Wisconsin, not only in the Midwest, but throughout the country and even the world. When it rains, it's pouring more than it used to. And unfortunately, we had that tragedy less than a month ago in Texas. And in some ways, it's similar to what happened in Milwaukee in the sense that no one can believe that it could have been that extreme, but it was. And so to some degree, we're all caught off guard when that happens.
Absolutely. So how is climate change impacting our wet summers?
One thing is it's making the summers warmer in general. And we've also detected a trend toward more humid summers. This summer in particular has been very, very humid. I know that's the sense that most people have just walking around, like, boy, it's been so humid and we haven't gotten many breaks. But the data also bear that out. If we look at Wisconsin, as a state, we're finding that the second highest humidity occurred this July among all Julys we have in our database going back to 1979. So pretty impressive. And for the entire eastern 2/3 of the country, east of the Rockies, this has been the most humid summer on record dating back to at least 1950. So it's not just in Wisconsin, it's all over the eastern 2/3 of the U.S. that we're experiencing a very soggy, very humid, and pretty wet summer.
Well, the last time we had you on the show here, we talked about this idea of Madison as a so-called climate haven. And we kind of said, oh, how realistic is that? How much of a climate haven are we having here in Wisconsin? But when we're thinking about the future of our city and the people who choose to live here, how big of a threat is flooding for our future?
Well, right now, I don't think you're going to hear too many climate haven advocates out there, considering between the flooding we just had and then less than a month ago, the terrible wildfire smoke we had yet again for the second time in 3 summers. So it's a reminder that no one is fully safe from extreme weather and no one's immune to climate change. And this is yet another instance of that. Wisconsin traditionally gets a fair amount of flooding, and that's been especially true in the past 20 years. We've had more than our fair share of flooding. The 2010s was the very wettest decade in Wisconsin's history, and the 2020s are above average as well. So we've had the most recent full decade being the wettest, and the current half decade or so also being wetter than average.
Yeah, I just feel like anecdotally over those years, just driving around Wisconsin, just seeing fields flooded and just the issues that, farmers have to face and then flooding that's hitting our cities. We've been talking mostly about flash floods, the type of flooding that is caused by a lot of rain falling in a short time period, right? And overwhelming the storm drains. But how concerned should we be about other types of flooding from, bodies of water, like our lakes? We got a lot of lakes here in Madison.
It's a good point. There are different types of floods, and one size doesn't fit all. Flash flooding is probably what gets the most attention because it's just so dramatic, like what we experienced in Milwaukee recently. But another important type of flooding is called groundwater flooding, and that's when you get an excessive amount of rainfall and or snowmelt in an area over a prolonged period. It could be weeks, it could be months, it could even be years if you have a very wet period. And that causes the water tables in the ground to rise. And if you happen to live in a low-lying area or encounter roads that are in low-lying areas, that can lead to very long-lived flooding conditions, even as long as months or years that floodwater persists. So that's a different kind of problem. The one advantage of flash flooding is that it doesn't linger. You have the effects, you have the damage right away, but then the water goes away and you can recover. But with groundwater flooding, you have to live with the consequences for a very long time.
Hey, animal lovers! Your favorite team needs you to cheer them on at Bark and Wine Tailgate on Saturday, September 27th at the Dane County Humane Society. From 3 to 6 p.m., join in the tailgate spirit with delicious food, refreshing drinks, tail-wagging games, a silent auction, and plenty of furry fun for a great cause. Plus, you'll get to meet some amazing animal greeters who will make the day unforgettable. Want more? Grab VIP pregame tickets to enjoy early access and other special perks. Can't wait for the event? The Donate to Vote Showdown is on. Every dollar you donate to cheer for your favorite animal team, cat, dog, wildlife, or critter, counts as one vote to crown this year's champion. Plus, your donation supports animals in our community. Last year, Team Cat clawed their way to the top, but who will win this tailgate rematch? That's up to you. Get your tickets today and start casting your votes now at giveshelter.org/BW. Remember that amazing little cafe you discovered last summer with the perfect latte and crazy view? Or that sweet hiking spot your friend told you about but you can't remember the name? With Overlook Maps, special places never get lost again. Create personal lists of places you've been and want to go. Build your must-visit list for your next vacation, your foodie favorites for date nights, or your weekend getaways when you need to escape. Share your favorite hidden gems with friends and family. Let them discover that incredible barbecue joint you found, or that scenic overlook that takes your breath away. Or keep your secret spots completely private. Planning a trip with friends? Create a shared list where everyone can add their ideas. Visiting a new city? Check out lists from locals who know the real gems, not just the tourist traps. And here's the best part. No ads cluttering your lists. No one selling your data to advertisers. Just your personal collection of amazing places organized exactly how you want them. Overlook Maps, collect, organize, and share the places that matter to you. Download free at overlookmaps.com and check out overlookmaps.com/Madison to see some of our lists and great spots on a map and in your pocket. Your places, your way. When we're thinking about other weather events we need to be considering as the climate continues to change, I'm thinking about tornadoes. Those are things that are dramatic, come in fast, and they're hard to predict. Do you have other weather events in mind that we should be keeping an eye on in addition to flooding?
A couple come to mind. One is ice storms. Wisconsin is no stranger to ice storms, but they are more common to our south. And that in winter, places like central Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, those areas, they get more rain and then more freezing rain than we do in the winter. We get, relatively speaking, more snow, at least in the recent past. But as the climate continues to warm, we'll probably be seeing many of those snowstorms turn into rainstorms in the winter or freezing rain events. And that poses a big problem. There was a really dramatic ice storm up in northern Wisconsin in early March of this year that caused a lot of damage. And so that's something I have my eye on. And another one that is infrequent but can be really damaging are straight line winds, the so-called derechos. Those form from severe thunderstorm outbreaks, and we've had some really high-profile derechos recently, especially in Iowa, but they clipped parts of Wisconsin and Illinois too. And that's something that we're not quite sure how that will change in the future as the climate warms, but it's another type of event beyond tornadoes that is very significant.
Well, I want to turn to talk about storm warnings. You know, the National Weather Service issued flash flood warnings a few days before the storm hit. We all knew it was coming. We were waiting for it. I'm going to be honest, I still went out and did a bunch of things on Saturday because the weather seemed okay. I'm just trying to watch it and keep a close eye. I can imagine that that is exactly how people get caught up in extreme weather. How do these warnings work?
Well, important to make a distinction between a watch and a warning. We, meaning southern Wisconsin as a whole, was under a flood watch for quite a bit of time ahead of these weekend storms. That it included Milwaukee, it included Madison, much of south central Wisconsin, even southwest Wisconsin. What that means is that conditions are favorable for floods to occur. It doesn't mean the floods have happened. It doesn't mean that everyone in that flood watch area will receive flooding conditions, but it means beware. A flood warning means it's happening now. You need to take action. And those flood warnings were issued once the storms actually developed and it was clear which counties were being hardest hit. So making that distinction between a watch and a warning is important. And when there's a watch, you shouldn't change your plans. You should just keep an eye out, beware, make sure you have a plan in case the weather does turn quickly. But when there's a warning, whether it's a tornado warning or a flood warning, that means it's happening now. There's a danger and you need to take action to protect yourself.
Well, something we've been covering a fair amount on this show are the impacts of the Trump administration's cuts to research, and including cuts to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service staffing and research capabilities. Is that impacting at all our ability to track weather? Like, has it impacted this work?
Having a fully funded weather service with all of its data collection is really important. Obviously, the staffing is probably the most evident, whether there's a fully staffed group or not. But there are other ways in which funding matters too. The detection, the weather conditions that go into it, ingesting that into our computers, weather balloon launches to know what the conditions are in the upper atmosphere. All of those things go into making good forecasts. And forecast quality has improved steadily over the years. Since I was a kid, I noticed a huge difference in the improvements in weather forecasts across the board in all seasons. And the data show this too. So we certainly don't want to lose that improvement because it saves lives, it helps the economy. It's just altogether critical for our well-being.
And so has there been any change in that our ability to access information and, you know, the difference between it changing from a watch to a warning and our confidence in our systems from the National Weather Service?
I think the jury's out. I think it's too early to say. Some of these staffing cuts have been just too recent for us to know if it's affected forecast quality. And certain offices have been affected more than others. So it's a little hard to say. But when we have more time elapsed, we should be able to say that if, these places that lost their weather balloon launches, these offices that had staff cuts, were their forecasts affected? We ought to be able to make that comparison, and we'll just have to wait and see what the evidence shows.
Yeah, well, it's been really exciting talking to you because, y'all at the Wisconsin State Climatology Office, who advanced regional climate science have been ramping up your efforts and bolstering our systems here in the state. Have any of the sort of national cuts impacted your work at all in terms of climate research and, your ability to do this sort of research looking into future climate patterns?
We've been lucky in our office. We've been able to not only maintain full funding, but we've gotten 2 or 3 new staff members in the past 6 months. So that's been really great, helping to meet our mission. And so Where we felt it more in terms of these federal cuts has been with our partners in the National Weather Service, for example, or other government agencies who are no longer able to work with us because either they've lost their jobs or they've taken early retirement or they've been reassigned to other duties, for example. We've also lost some data sources. For instance, NOAA used to keep a $1 billion weather disaster database, so we would know these very expensive weather disasters, how frequent they are and how they're changing over time. But they announced that earlier this year that was going to be discontinued. They also have a really great blog series called climate.gov, very educational information on different weather and climate topics. And it was announced earlier this year that was going to be discontinued. So we use those sources of information. We rely on our partnerships a lot as a state climatology office. And so it definitely affects us and our ability to serve the public when those things are compromised. But fortunately for us as an office, we haven't been directly hit, and we're very fortunate so far about that.
Well, there's some good news in that. I know, Steve, when these sorts of serious events happen, it's quite frightening thinking, we're thinking about everyone who's in southeastern Wisconsin that have been pretty negatively impacted, and also thinking about what could happen here in Madison. Do you have any words for folks who are just concerned about their future and like what role they can possibly have to mitigate the effects of climate change here, and so we don't have such disastrous weather events if it's, possible? Some sort of words of advice or solace? You don't have to give us solace if it's not deserved, but
yeah, it's a big issue. There's two types of avenues we could think of when it comes to dealing with climate change. One path is mitigation, meaning trying to reduce the problem to begin with. And the other avenue is adaptation. What do we do about the impacts? And both of those should be addressed. Mitigation means things like how can we lower our personal carbon footprint? How can we leverage larger parts of society to lower their carbon footprints on the county, state, national scale, for example? And then there's the adaptation part of it. Given that we're seeing this increase in extreme flooding events, for example, extreme rainfalls, what can we do to protect ourselves and our property? Flooded basements, how can we better flood-proof our basements? How can we anticipate what some of the effects of climate change are happening now and what they will be in the future? And what can we do to better protect ourselves? In terms of bang for the buck, adaptation is the way to go on a small scale. So if you're dealing with the city of Madison, Dane County, even the state of Wisconsin, the amount of carbon that's emitted by us is small relative to the whole globe, but the impact that we can have in adapting on that small scale is huge because it's immediate. It's something we can do directly that we can tailor to our needs. And so I think the smaller the spatial scale, the smaller the city, county, state that we're dealing with, the relatively more important aspects are for adaptation.
And Steve, before we let you go, now that our region just saw another 1,000-year flooding event, are we good to sit back and let our guard down?
Absolutely not. One of the things that's important to realize about that term, 1,000-year event or 100-year event, is that is not meant to be a predictable timescale. A 1,000-year event does not mean that Milwaukee can sit back for the next 999 years and relax. Instead, it means that in any given year, it means that there's one chance out of 1,000 that an event of this magnitude can occur. And it also means that those statistics are based on the past climate, the climate of the past 20, 30, 40, 50, even 100 years, which is not the climate we're living in today. We're living in a climate with more extremes. So when we say a 1,000-year event, like we attributed to the Milwaukee storms, really, that's probably less than a 1 in 1,000 chance. Now, there is probably more likely in the present day climate than it was based on the statistics that created that term, that 1 in 1,000 chance.
So we're going to stay vigilant and be thoughtful and think about mitigation and adaptation. Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and talk us through this kind of scary moment in weather history. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Bianca. I appreciate it.
That's Steve Vavris, state climatologist and director of the Wisconsin State Climatology Office. That's all for today, here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, your host. Don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. And hey, if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with a storm chaser or somebody who's got a basement that regularly floods? We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until next time, take good care.